We're getting ready for our installation of Param 5500, which is our self-leveling cement-based topping. We always start off with obtaining our right concrete surface profile, which is typically in the range of 3 to 5 CSP, which can be achieved via diamond grinding or shot blasting. On highly porous substrates, it is a great idea to go ahead and take the premium primer here and thin it 1 part water to 1 part primer. Now I've already shook this up, and we're going to go ahead on a small application like this. We're going to just simply mix it up with a stir stick. If you're doing a larger application, go ahead and use the squirrel mixer like we mixed the previous epoxy. Now, over a wood substrate, you do want to go full strength over a wood substrate. This system requires a double prime. So the logic is, today, for example, we're going to put our first application of our thin down 1-to-1 primer, and then we'll come back a minimum of 10 hours later or the next day, and then we're going to apply our second application of the primer and wait roughly 2 hours, and then you're ready to go over the surface with your Param 5500. Okay? Param is an interesting product in the sense that you can intricately color it with different integral coloring systems, whether it's an integral pigment or color fast. You can also use both solvent and water-based dyes over the Param. But the nice thing about the Param 5500 is it's giving you the look of polished concrete depending on the type of sealer that you're using. So perhaps it's not in the budget to do a full traditional grind hone polish with the grinding machine. This is an economical way that you can achieve a polished concrete look simply by sealing the uncolored Param 5500. All right, we're going to go ahead and roll down our first application of the Param bonding primer. Now this is an indication, you can see how quickly this is drying. This is what I would consider a very, very absorbent surface, which is even more of a reason and a good demonstration of why you would thin the primer. If you don't thin the primer down on a surface, especially like this, it could just lay on the surface, be more sacrificial, and it would lead to possibly peeling because the solids, it's not penetrating down into the pores of the concrete. If you have a substrate that is really porous or it has a lot of extreme divots for whatever reason, or an excessive CSP, concrete surface profile, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and skip the roller like you see me using here and use a push broom. And what the push broom does is it forces the materials down into the low crevices of the texture of the concrete. Here a roller is fine because it's not that aggressively textured. So it is a good idea on real rough surfaces, go ahead and use the push broom. Either spray apply the material and push broom it in, or simply dump it onto the surface like we're doing here, and then push broom that in. The Param 5500 goes down at a minimum thickness of 1/4 of an inch, and you can go up to 1.5 inches in one lift. Now, if you need to go thicker, for example, you have an old warehouse floor that has area drains that they now want this entire floor level, where the water used to slope down in the area drains. Perhaps they're getting rid of the drains. You can extend it with pea gravel, and believe it or not, build this material up to 5 inches. So consider that. If you need to go thicker, go ahead and extend the material with pea gravel. We're getting ready to install our Param 5500 self-leveling overlay cement. And last evening we put our first coat of the Param Premium Primer, which is a styrene acrylic priming system. So it's dried roughly now for 12 to 13 hours, and what we're about to do is apply our second coat of the Param Premium Primer, and that needs to dry for roughly 2 to 3 hours before the installation of the Param 5500. A couple of observations before we prime. you'll notice that we're going to be installing this material at an overall thickness of about 3/8 of an inch thick. So what we did is we used foam forms with two-sided tape. So on the bottom of these little foam rails basically that have been cut to the exact thickness that we want to pour our overlay, we have two-sided tape that will peel back, and we'll go ahead and stick it down so we have a barrier so our overlay cement just doesn't ooze off the slab or onto an adjoining area. So there are a couple of ways that you can bulkhead or dam off your overlay pour. You need to be conscious of that. So we'll show you how this sticks down. It simply peels off. One side of the tape is sticking to the foam while this other exposed side is actually sticky now. So what we're going to do is Brian's going to get on that side. We're going to stick it right down to this edge. I'll hold it up in the air while he goes right to that edge and then all the way down. And you notice he's just burnishing it down is all as he's doing. And then just for good measure, what we like to do is we like to tape back over the top of it so that when we're working with it, none of the foam pops off and ultimately ends up in your overlay system. So if you remember on the previous application of the Param Premium Primer, we talked about diluting it at 1 part water to 1 part bonding primer. So Brian can start mixing that. So he's going to put the 1 part primer into the water, and while he's mixing, I'll talk about a few other considerations. If you don't have access to these foam rails, there's a couple of other options. This is weather stripping, okay? And you can buy the weather stripping in different thicknesses and widths, and that simply will stick down to the floor and pretty much do the same thing here with our foam rails. But what you need to be careful about is if this is not adhering properly, it's very frustrating when you pour your Param 5500. I've actually seen it lift this and bow off the surface like that, and that's really upsetting when you're trying to get a nice clean line, okay? So one of the tips that I like to do is if I'm using the foam weather stripping, I will put a piece of duct tape to the concrete surface first, and then I'll stick the edge of the foam right to the edge of the duct tape, because here there's a lot more surface area for the tape to stick to, and then this foam tape sticks really nicely to the duct tape. You pour your overlay cement, and then you come back and peel it off, and you have a clean, crisp line. One other observation, go ahead and take the time to mask over the top of that, like you see here, because inevitably what's going to happen when you're pouring your self-leveling Param 5500, what's going to happen is you'll see it kind of flow over. So you need to have something here to protect that from contaminating your adjoining area. You pour your overlay, once it's dry, you come back and everything peels right off and you're left with a nice clean surface. Okay? That's one way. Another popular way that you can form a barrier to contain your overlay cement is with what we call terrazzo strips or divider strips. And again, this comes in a wide variety of shapes, heights, widths over here. And basically, you would attach this to your substrate. You can either use a liquid nails type product, an epoxy resin, or depending on the substrate and how crucial it is, you could actually shoot it into the floor with a pneumatic nail gun, basically. So if you do that, regardless of if you're going to be polishing in it or not polishing it, what you need to be concerned about is that making sure that this rail is in fact level, despite what the concrete substrate's doing. It's not uncommon to have your concrete have undulations, and maybe it's not a super flat floor. And what happens is, if it's not flat, it's going to follow the contour of those undulations, and we're working with a material that really has a tendency to want to level itself out. So if you have a low area with your strips like this, the overlay cement's just going to pretty much go right over the top of that strip, okay? Which, if you're grinding and polishing, like the Param 6000, for example, that's not an issue. But we're putting the 5500 down, so you want to make sure that you go ahead and make sure your divider strips are nice and level. So there's a couple ways you can use a laser level, and you might have to shim certain areas. Put a shim here, and of course, if this was the scenario, making this rail level like that, Now we've got a gap right here, which means you're going to have to use a silicone filler under here because it would just ooze up and under there. So here's just a couple of other examples of different strips that we use. There's zinc divider strips. This is 3/8 by 1/8. There's brass divider strips. This is 3/8 by half. So it comes in a multitude of different configurations. And I really like using these strips. I think it's just one added decorative enhancement to your overlay installation. So we're going to start putting our primer down. Brian's just going to simply take the mixed up Param primer, and he's just going to dump some right on the concrete here. I'm going to use a traditional 3/8 snap roller, and we're going to roll it down. We're going to wait roughly 2 hours and come back, and we're going to start installing our Param 5500 self-leveling overlay cement. Now once again, on a large project, there's no reason you couldn't put this in a pump-up sprayer and spray it down and then come in and back roll it like you see here.